He was never meant to fit in. From the beginning, Richard Branson's life was a contradiction, a boy who couldn't read the rules yet would one day rewrite them for the world. He wasn't the sharpest student, but he had something rarer, an unbreakable instinct to fail, and try again. When teachers called him a dreamer, they meant it as an insult. He took it as prophecy. In a world obsessed with perfection, he built his empire on imperfection. While others chased efficiency, he chased experience. When businessmen wore suits, he wore a grin. And when they spoke of limits, he asked, why should there be any? Branson's journey would defy logic, from a teenage dropout running a student magazine to the founder of the Virgin Empire, a brand that stood not for products, but for spirit. Virgin wasn't about selling things. It was about selling belief, the belief that business could be fun, daring, and deeply human. He built success not by following blueprints, but by breaking them. He failed publicly, laughed loudly, and kept moving forward. Even when the stakes grew higher, airlines, music, space, he carried the same reckless optimism that once got him expelled. It wasn't arrogance. It was faith. Faith that courage and kindness could coexist. That rebellion could build, not destroy. So who is Richard Branson really? A reckless adventurer chasing wind and sky, or a visionary who proved that heart and chaos can create something eternal? He didn't just break the rules. He made the world love him for it. And that is where the story of the rebel begins. Long before the private jets, the islands and the rockets, there was a restless boy in Surrey with a mind that refused to sit still. Richard Branson was born into a family that believed in freedom, not the kind found in politics or money, but in courage. His mother, Eve, was fearless, a woman who told her children to find their own path, then pushed them toward it, sometimes quite literally. When Richard was just a boy, she dropped him miles away from home and told him to find his way back. It wasn't cruelty. It was a lesson. Figure it out yourself. School was never kind to him. Words danced on the page in patterns he couldn't untangle. Dyslexia, they would call it later. Teachers mistook it for laziness. His report card said he'd either end up in prison or become a millionaire. Even then, Branson smiled. Failure didn't scare him. Boredom did. While others memorized lessons, he learned people how to talk, how to listen, how to make them believe in something that didn't exist yet. He was already selling before he had anything to sell. At 16, frustrated by the monotony of classrooms and the conformity of society, he decided to start a magazine. Student. It wasn't about profit. It was about giving young people a voice. He called advertisers, wrote letters, borrowed phones, charmed sponsors. He failed often, but his conviction was louder than his inexperience. Each rejection taught him a simple truth: enthusiasm could open doors that credentials never would. When the first issue of Student rolled off the press, Branson wasn't just a publisher. He was free. For the first time, his rebellion had direction. He had built something from nothing, with nothing but nerve. The magazine didn't make him rich, but it made him fearless. Behind that youthful grin was a philosophy forming. Business was not about numbers. It was about energy. If something felt right, he did it. If it didn't, he changed it. He didn't seek permission. He didn't wait for approval. He acted. Every misstep, every lost pound, every sleepless night, every failed idea became part of his education. He didn't learn from textbooks. He learned from consequences. And within that restless young man, something deeper began to take shape, a belief that business could be adventure, not duty. That failure wasn't the opposite of success, but the road leading to it. The world around him valued caution, structure, respect for hierarchy. Branson valued none of it. He valued motion, curiosity, risk. He saw rules as invitations to experiment. And when others called him reckless, he simply smiled, because to him, the greater danger was living safely. He didn't want to climb ladders. He wanted to build wings. And with that quiet defiance, the rebel began to find his rhythm, a rhythm that would soon echo across music, airlines, and outer space. The boy who couldn't follow instructions was about to teach the world how to fly without them. It started, as most revolutions do, with frustration and a phone. In the late 1960s, the young Richard Branson sat in a cramped London basement running his magazine. Student and struggling to pay rent. Music filled the airwaves, but records were expensive. The system was built for profit, not passion. Branson saw an opportunity not in what was working, but in what was broken. He began selling mail-order records through a small ad in his magazine. The idea was simple: cheaper albums for students, faster delivery, no middleman. Orders poured in faster than he could count. Boxes stacked against the walls. The phone never stopped ringing. And one day, when a customer asked the name of his new company, he laughed and said, "We're all virgins at business." The name stuck. Virgin Records was born, not polished, not perfect, but alive. The rebel had found his rhythm. From that tiny shop, Branson built something that felt less like a business and more like a movement. Virgin wasn't about transactions, it was about rebellion disguised as service. It spoke to misfits, dreamers, outsiders. The red logo became a flag for those who didn't fit the mold, and behind it all stood Branson hair, wild smile, wide energy, boundless, the anti-executive, in a suitless revolution. But his true stroke of genius wasn't selling records. It was believing in people the world had dismissed. While other labels chased safe bets, Virgin signed the ones who scared them: the Sex Pistols, Mike Oldfield Culture Club. Music that was raw, angry, beautiful. Soundtracks for rebellion. We were the underdogs, Branson would later say, and that made us dangerous. The world of business saw chaos. He saw culture. Virgin Records exploded into success. Oldfield's Tubular Bells became a global hit. The Sex Pistols redefined punk. The brand became more than music, it became identity. People didn't buy Virgin albums. They belonged to Virgin. Branson had done something no business school could teach. He'd turned emotion into enterprise. Still behind the laughter and long hair was calculation. He watched trends, listened to customers, trusted instinct over data. He built a brand that broke every rule yet made perfect sense. Virgin stood for authenticity in a world addicted to appearances. He never called himself a businessman. He called himself an adventurer. As the company grew, so did the scale of his ideas. Why stop at records? Why not trains, airlines? Even space. Branson's philosophy was simple: if an industry felt dull or unfair, disrupt it. If people said you can't do it, louder. From that basement came a mindset that would define a generation, a belief that business didn't have to be serious to be significant. He didn't invent music. He amplified freedom. And as Virgin Records soared, Richard Branson realized that his brand was no longer just about sound. It was about spirit, the fearless human urge to challenge gravity in whatever form it takes. The boy who once couldn't follow the rules had just proven that breaking them could build an empire. By the early 1980s, the rebel who had conquered music was restless again. The rhythm of success no longer thrilled him. He wanted altitude. When an airline lost his luggage and his patience, he decided to start his own. Most men would complain. Richard Branson built Virgin Atlantic. The idea was absurd: a record label owner going to war with British Airways, the pride of a nation. But Branson never believed in limits, only in momentum. He mortgaged his beloved Virgin Records, sold his London mansion, and bought a single used Boeing 747. Friends called it madness. He called it adventure. From day one, Virgin Atlantic felt different. Flight attendants laughed, music played in cabins, champagne flowed before takeoff. Where competitors offered service, Branson offered experience. He wanted passengers to feel alive in the sky, not trapped in a metal tube. Business, he said, should be fun. If it's not, you're doing it wrong. British Airways didn't laugh. They saw him as a nuisance, a boy crashing an adult's game. What followed became legend: sabotage lawsuits and a dirty tricks campaign meant to crush the upstart. But Branson turned the war into a story. He smiled on camera, sued for libel, and won. The payout went straight to his employees, a rebel's declaration that loyalty mattered more than revenge. He wasn't running an airline. He was leading a movement, one that valued humanity over hierarchy. Every obstacle only fueled his daredevil spirit. When business was tough, he climbed into a hot air balloon and crossed oceans. When investors doubted him, he flew through storms. Each stunt, each flight, each near-death experience wasn't vanity, it was metaphor. He was proving that risk wasn't something to fear, but to master. Virgin Atlantic became a symbol of audacity. Passengers chose it not because it was cheaper, but because it felt alive. From the red uniforms to the cheeky ads, it carried Branson's DNA: fearless, funny, and free. He treated his brand like an extension of himself, unpredictable, but full of heart. He once said, "If you want to stand out, you can't just do the same things better. You have to do them differently," and he lived by it. What began as a reckless challenge soon became one of the world's most respected airlines. But for Branson, profit was never the point. He wasn't chasing money. He was chasing moments, the thrill of defying gravity, the satisfaction of proving that joy and business could share the same sky. He didn't just take flight. He taught the world that rebellion, when done with purpose, could soar. By the 1990s, Virgin was no longer a logo. It was an attitude. The name stretched across airplanes, trains, hotels, banks, mobile phones, even cola cans. To outsiders, it looked like chaos. To Richard Branson, it was harmony, a symphony of risk and laughter conducted by instinct. He didn't build companies. He built experiences. Every new venture began the same way, with curiosity and a grin. He asked, "Why does this have to be so dull?" and then turned that question into a business plan. Where banks felt cold, he made Virgin Money friendly. Where telecoms felt rigid, he made Virgin Mobile playful. Even in failure, he found joy. "At least, we had fun losing," he'd say, and mean it. His secret wasn't genius. It was humanity. Branson believed business worked best when people felt alive. He trusted intuition over spreadsheets, humor over hierarchy, kindness over control. He walked through offices barefoot, answered phones himself, and treated employees like partners, not subordinates. "Train people well enough so they can leave," he said. "Treat them well enough so they don't want to." Under his leadership, Virgin became a living contradiction, an empire that refused to act like one. No suits, no rigid titles, no fear of failure. Where traditional CEOs ruled from boardrooms, Branson led from the front seat of adventure, piloting jets, bungee jumping off hotels, dressing as a flight attendant for charity. Every stunt was outrageous. Everyone had purpose. He wanted the world to remember that business could have a soul. But behind the mischief was method. Each risk he took was a message: dare to care. Virgin didn't compete by being the biggest, but by being the most human. That emotional connection became its armor. People didn't just buy Virgin, they believed in it. He once said, "Screw business as usual," and lived like he meant it. The Virgin brand wasn't about markets or margins. It was about energy, the contagious kind that made employees dream and customers smile. When asked how he managed hundreds of ventures, he laughed. "I don't manage, I inspire." Yet the higher the empire rose, the louder the whispers grew. Could playfulness survive in a corporate world, obsessed with profit? Could a rebel stay authentic when his rebellion became global? For Branson, the answer was always the same. Success meant nothing if it didn't make people happy. He had turned joy into currency, trust into brand equity, and rebellion into legacy. The Virgin Empire was proof that business didn't have to be sterile. It could be thrilling, spontaneous, alive. He didn't just sell products. He sold the feeling that life could still be fun. And in a world growing more mechanical by the day, Richard Branson reminded humanity of something simple: that the greatest enterprise of all is to never lose your sense of play. Every adventurer learns that gravity is patient. It waits for the moment when confidence turns to overreach, when flight becomes fall. For Richard Branson, that moment came again and again, and he met each one with the same grin that first carried him skyward. The rebel had built an empire of joy, but joy alone could not protect him from the storms ahead. Virgin's story was never written in a straight line. For every triumph, the records, the airlines, the mobiles, there were crashes buried beneath the headlines. Virgin Cola, meant to dethrone Coca-Cola, fizzled into oblivion. Virgin Brides, a playful wedding brand, became a punchline. Virgin Cars stalled before it ever left the showroom. He poured himself into each venture, believing that passion could bend reality. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But he never saw failure as tragedy. To Branson, it was tuition, the price of staying alive in the game. Even the skies tested him. In 1987, his hot air balloon tore across the Atlantic, lost in a storm. He and his co-pilot crash-landed in the icy waters off Ireland, barely escaping alive. A few years later, another balloon flight over the Pacific ended the same way, wind-screaming metal, groaning Branson, fighting both gravity and fate. He should have stopped. He didn't. "I'd rather die trying," he said, "than live wondering." Courage for him was never the absence of fear. It was motion in spite of it. And every fall only deepened his belief that risk was sacred proof that you were still reaching. But even the bravest rebels carry scars. The war with British Airways had drained him. The financial crisis of the 1990s nearly broke Virgin. To save his airline, he was forced to sell Virgin Records, the company that started it all. As he signed the papers, he cried. The sale wasn't a defeat. It was a shedding of skin. He learned that sometimes the cost of freedom is letting go of the things that first gave it to you. Through every loss, Branson's resilience hardened into philosophy. He no longer measured success by numbers, but by purpose. He began to look beyond Earth toward causes larger than profit, environmental activism, social entrepreneurship, and the boldest dream of all, space. He didn't want to escape the planet. He wanted to elevate it. In each failure, he found clarity. In each near-death renewal. The same man who fell from the sky kept getting up, brushing off the dust, and smiling into the wind. Because Richard Branson never feared crashing. He feared standing still. And from the wreckage of his mistakes rose a new horizon, one that shimmered not with wealth, but with wonder. The rebel's next frontier was waiting above the clouds, and he was ready to chase it no matter how thin the air became. By the time Richard Branson reached the edge of space, he was no longer chasing altitude, he was chasing meaning. The boy who once couldn't sit still in a classroom now floated weightless above the clouds, looking down at the planet that had given him everything. The rebel had built his empire. Now he was building his legacy. Virgin Galactic was more than a company. It was a declaration that adventure belonged to everyone, not just astronauts and billionaires. For Branson, space wasn't about escape. It was about perspective. He wanted people to look back at Earth and see not borders or brands, but home. "We are one species," he said, "and we have only one planet." Those words, once spoken by a businessman, now sounded like a prayer. But legacy is never built in silence. As Virgin's reach expanded, critics called him a showman, a dreamer, playing God with money and risk. Yet behind the headlines was something purer, a man still driven by curiosity. The same spirit that had fueled a magazine, a record label, and an airline was now reaching beyond gravity itself. He didn't build companies to prove power. He built them to prove possibility. Even as his hair turned silver and his pace slowed, Branson's laughter never did. He still surfed storms, still hugged strangers, still turned meetings into adventures. He once said, "Life is not about being rich. It's about being useful." And he lived it. Investing in clean energy education and humanitarian efforts through the Virgin Unite Foundation. His empire had grown vast, but his purpose had grown simple: to make business a force for good. He had turned rebellion into philosophy, failure into ritual, risk into art. His wealth wasn't measured in numbers, but in stories of people who dared because he dared first. And when he finally touched the edge of space in 2021, his eyes filled with something rare: stillness. For a man defined by motion, it was a revelation. From up there, the world looked small, fragile, beautiful. Every mountain he had climbed, every company he had built, every fall he had survived, led to that single moment of perspective. He didn't go to space to escape gravity. He went to understand it. Now, as his empire continues without him at the helm, the Virgin spirit remains bold, joyful, untamed. It's in every startup that dares to laugh at fear, in every dreamer who risks being misunderstood. Richard Branson didn't just build businesses. He built belief that life itself is the greatest adventure. And when the history of enterprise is told, his legacy will not be measured by profit or power, but by courage. The courage to smile in the face of chaos, to leap when the ground feels safest, to live as proof that rebellion, when guided by heart, can reach the stars. He didn't conquer the sky. He reminded us it was always ours to touch.